What if I told you that what you knew about Brown v. Board of Education wasn't the whole story? You probably know that in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board that all segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. But there's an important backstory. A huge step towards integration happened because of Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher. For people like Ada Sipuel, segregation and racism were frontiers. Most people could not cross these boundaries because of fear of the danger sure to come. Dangers her own family knew too well. Only 25 years after her parents had lived through the Tulsa Race Massacre, Ada wanted to get into the University of Oklahoma but was denied because she was African American. Yet she dared to challenge OU's decision in court. That is what makes her a special pioneer. Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher's unyielding courage to challenge segregation laws led to her acceptance into OU law and crossed the frontiers of racism and segregation. Her case brought international attention to the NAACP's cause at a critical stage. Her victory at the graduate level pushed the frontier closer to full integration, conditioning the minds of the people favorably to believe that schools should integrate at the lower levels and making it much easier for the NAACP to keep fighting and eventually win Brown v. Board. Ada Lois grew up in a period where racism fueled unfair laws against Black Americans. Although slavery was abolished in 1865 by the 13th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment promised privileges and protections associated with full citizenship, many white Southerners thought of African Americans as inferior and looked for ways to continue to oppress Black people. Racist whites even lynched Black Americans unfairly for doing things such as becoming too successful. White lawmakers also found ways to persecute African Americans and stamp them with a badge of inferiority by creating Jim Crow laws, state and local laws enforcing racial segregation. These laws led to separate hotels, segregated seats on buses, divided water fountains, and more. Early cases to challenge segregation led to decisions like Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, which established the precedent that as long as white and Black facilities were equal, it was okay to segregate. But separate but equal was a fantasy. Black schools, equipment, and facilities were seldom equal. White schools almost always had better funding. Importantly, Ada said in her autobiography, no level of spending could ever erase the stain of inferiority segregation stamped on the school. In addition, it was a difficult social battle. Many white parents despised having their children mix with Black students and supported segregation.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
For people who grew up with Jim Crow laws, a separate but equal idea created a frontier of racism and segregation that begged to be crossed, especially when it came to school segregation. Learning is a foundation for everything, and that is why the NAACP chose to target the desegregation of schools before everything else. The African American community was hungry to learn. School segregation was like a locked door that denied the necessity of equal education and opportunities in life, which motivated pioneers like Ada Lois to stand up to these injustices no matter what happened. The NAACP knew this door had to be burst open, and Ada had the confidence and poise to lead the way. During the summer and fall of 1945, the National NAACP reached out to all of its chapters to enlist their participation in a desegregation plan. For this to happen, the NAACP needed qualified plaintiffs with an unyielding belief in the principles that all men are created equal no matter what color of their skin and that everybody deserves an equal education. The plaintiffs will need to be academically qualified, articulate, and have the poise and confidence to fight through the long battle. They would need to be able to delay their career and lives during the lawsuit, and they would have to be ready to take the risk of not getting a job, being run out of town, or even being killed. With Thurgood Marshall, who would eventually become the lead counsel and Brown v. Board pushing them forward, the NAACP chapter was ready to find a plaintiff to challenge Oklahoma's segregation laws. The NAACP was looking for men, and in particular, war veterans. Ada knew what qualities the NAACP wanted and believed she was as good as anybody. Ada had been valedictorian in high school and had gone to Langston University, where she had graduated with honors in English earlier that year. Ada was headstrong and could bear through any challenge that came. Ada had always wanted to be a lawyer and understood the risks and challenges she would face. Ada traveled to Oklahoma City and met with Roscoe Dungy, Oklahoma NAACP president. Dungy drilled Ada with questions to see how she would react under certain circumstances and reviewed her transcripts. Dungy thought Ada was perfect for the case. On January 14, 1946, Ada Lois, Roscoe Dungy, and W.A.J. Bullock marched up to the admissions office and applied to OU. In the letter of rejection, George Lane-Cross, president of OU, said Ada was academically qualified, but because of the color of her skin, she could not attend the university. The NAACP now had the evidence they needed and prepared for the lawsuit. On April 6, 1946, Ada, Hall, and Dungy filed a petition for mandamus seeking admission in the OU. The NAACP argued that separate but equal was the law of the land, but because they had no equal law school for African Americans, the state must admit her into OU. Even without funding for a new school, the state argued that they didn't know Ada wanted to go to law school and hadn't been given a chance to right a wrong and create a new law school. After a short trial, the judge made his ruling against the plaintiffs, but the NAACP was not defeated yet and prepared an appeal to the state court. The state also ruled for the defendants. The NAACP appealed the case to the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., where the Supreme Court justices came to a unanimous decision. They ruled, a Negro conceivably qualified to receive professional legal education offered by state cannot be denied such education because of her color. The state must provide such education for her in conformity with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and provided as soon as it does for applicants of any other group. This meant either letting Ada into OU or making a new law school, but either way, make it equal and do it fast. This particular ruling, to do it as fast as would be done for white students, crossed a frontier that had not been crossed before and was a big advancement for the NAACP. In a telegram, the NAACP said it was the furthest advance yet reached toward the principle that there can be no equality in a segregated system. The state met and in 6 days came up with Langston Law School. Langston Law was very unequal to OU law. The history was not the same. It was housed in the Capitol building and was small. 2 out of the 3 teachers had no teaching experience. The curriculum was not up to date, and there was no student body. That was just a start of how unequal it was. Ada refused to apply to Langston, and the NAACP challenged the school's equity in court. The state argued that the teachers, although having no teaching experience, were very good lawyers and were willing to take time away from their firms to teach at Langston. They said that Langston law students would have access to the Capitol Library, which was better than the OU library. They also argued that OU was overcrowded, so having the school all to herself would be good for Ada. Because of that argument, the judge ruled in favor of the state. But when the state realized they couldn't pay for Langston Law, they were forced to close it and had no choice but to break the state segregation law and let Ada into OU. Segregationalists were against this, and Ada was still required to sit in the very back of class with a sign that said colored. Although nobody directly confronted her with slurs or harassment, behind her back or when she walked past racists in the hall, they would say nasty things and whisper racial slurs. However, most of the students at OU were okay with Ada joining and even went as far as to protest for her acceptance during the trial. Within days, the colored sign was ripped down and thrown out a window. Then white students began to sit next to Ada. In 1951, Ada graduated with a Bachelor of Law and in 1952 passed the bar exam. She started practicing law in Chickasha, her hometown. In 1992, 3 years before Ada passed away, the governor made her part of the OU Board of Regents, the very people who denied her admission so many years ago. For a movement to happen, people have to change their minds and then do something about it. Before Ada's case, African Americans had few accessible graduate schools, and this denied their basic human right. This changed after Ada won. Ada's victory didn't only affect graduate schools. Newspapers also headlined her internationally and brought attention to the NAACP's cause. With all this publicity, Ada became the face of the movement and provided a new rallying cry for the NAACP. The public became more aware of the gravity of racism and segregation because of this and were moved to take action. Ada's victory provided a fresh voice for the black community when it was needed most. The Supreme Court's ruling in Ada's favor that the state had to give her equal protection as fast as they did for white students was the first case to do this and proved it was possible to integrate fast. This gave the NAACP the backing they needed to move forward full throttle with their desegregation plan. As Ada said herself, apparently desegregation at the higher level conditioned the minds of the people favorably toward the segregation-desegregation question when it arose at the lower level. The sentiment of the people had changed. She made future litigation much easier because she put people's emotions on the side of integration. When it came to school desegregation, Ada unlocked the door and led the way while Brown threw the door off its hinges and let the rest of desegregation through. However, going through didn't necessarily equate to running through. The Brown v. Board ruling provided no way to enforce desegregation, and that led to Brown 2 and the all-deliberate speed compromise, referring to how states should proceed. The NAACP wanted speed and fought for integration as soon as possible, while southern states focused on being deliberate, slow, and careful, and procrastinated integration. It took years to integrate the majority of schools, and the job still isn't completely done. Although not perfect, the United States of America is substantially more equal than it was before pioneers such as Ruby Bridges, the Little Rock Nine, Thurgood Marshall, and others. Even though Ada Lois Sipuel Fisher is much less known than these figures, her willingness to step forward came when it was needed most, and her courage led the way to overcome the frontiers of racism and segregation in America's schools.